how do we communicate the value of our product? This is really one of the hardest things that we have in sales, because unless somebody knows about us or our product or even our category, that it's hard to describe what we do. And if we describe it the way they already know, they commoditize us and they try and make you equal to the other competitors, which is more dangerous because that's then a commodity. So today we're going to be talking about using metaphors here on the Brutal Truth About Sales and Selling podcast. And I've got Ann Miller joining us today, who's kind of an expert on this. She was originally a teacher and then turned sales trainer. And we have this great conversation about how to use metaphors and get people to understand what we do and why they need us. And this is a really interesting conversation. I wasn't really sure going into this, but I really enjoyed it. I think you will too. And to give you an example, I have a hard time telling my older relatives, what I do. They don't understand podcasts. And I say, well, you understand what a radio show is, right? And they go, of course. Well, I'm not stupid. And I say, well, imagine a radio show that you can listen to on your smartphone. And then you have to explain what a smartphone is. But that's a different problem. Hey, before I get into it, I want to make sure to thank everybody who's been sharing my content on LinkedIn. I've got a free course on how to set up a LinkedIn profile so it looks professional. Feel free to check that out at B2B revenue.com under training, and you can check out the other training courses there. The other one that's free is nudge.ai, and how I use AI to do my prospecting for me. Just use the coupon code NUDGE to get into there. Also, I want to thank CoVideo. CoVideo's been doing a great job helping me out, and we're talking again. I got Jason Price, who's been on the show several times. Make sure you check out those episodes. He's been on the B2B Revenue Leadership show as well. But I'm using video email. It is cranking this year. I'm using video on LinkedIn. This is going to be the year of video. You can check out my Instagram at Brian G. Burns, and also the funny videos that I'm putting out on LinkedIn daily, as well as my little walk and talk and answer questions. It's pretty much a videoed version of the Sales Questions podcast or sales tips type stuff. Let's get into the interview. Hey, Ann, thanks for joining us today. As a way of getting started, tell us about yourself.
Sure. Well, I have been in the sales training, speaking, and coaching business for about 30 years. Started out as a teacher, which if you think about it is one of the toughest sales jobs in the world when you're teaching Shakespeare to 10th graders. Wow. And have had a series of odd jobs on Wall Street and in advertising. And so one day someone took me to a seminar and I said, oh my God, that's what I was meant to do. And so I've been doing training ever since and loving it.
What happened at that seminar that changed your life?
Well, what happened was my father had died, and I realized, oh, my God, I am not immortal. And what did I really want to do with my life? And I was working for a magazine, and it was great, but I didn't want to be an ad director. And I saw this guy do a seminar on personality types, and I figured, wow, I'm in the wrong business, and I could do better on stage what he's doing than he's doing. Because I always liked to teach, always liked to act. I had some sales jobs, and so it was just a natural to move into the consulting, training, and speaking world.
That seems.
And within a month, I was working for a top sales training company.
Oh, great! I thought you might have went straight out on your own, but that story seems to be very consistent among people in this space.
Yeah. Oh, that they have checkered careers, as I like to call them.
No, not so much that. Yeah, they have that, and they've gone to somebody else's seminar. Well, the typical story is they go to somebody else's seminar, they apply it for about a year, they become really good, and then they model it or customize it to their own, and then go out on their own.
No, actually, I worked for the sales training company. Then I worked for a presentation company. I set them up in their office in New York. And then I went out on my own, modifying that and putting in things that I wanted. And then you realize very quickly you need more than one product to sell somebody. And so I grew and I developed negotiating programs, creative thinking programs. I think I was the first person to do a creative thinking program for salespeople, negotiating for salespeople, and it just grew like Topsy, and I loved it.
Excellent. So how do you get your clients, and why do they bring you in?
Right now, it's a lot by referral.
Yeah.
You do it for a long time, you get a lot of referrals. And I think they bring me in because I'm very good at helping people figure out how they can be better. I'm not good at a lot of things, but I'm good at that. I can work with somebody and see right away what the block is to their being effective as salespeople or as presenters, and then give them the tools that will work for them to be better. And I just love doing that.
And what do you typically see? I mean, I'm sure there must be a pattern after this amount of time.
Yeah, you do see a couple. I mean, there are some major themes that you see. One of them is that people focus too much on themselves when they're selling and presenting. I think, I recommend, I want you to look at. It's very I-centric, or eye strain, as a friend of mine once called it, as opposed to understanding that a client, a prospect, has to be able to see it and feel it and understand it. It's not that you, the salesperson, need to know it so much as they need to experience it. So that's one major theme. They talk too much and it's all about them. And the second theme that I see consistently is a lack of understanding of the importance of language and words. There's a difference between saying cost and investment. There's a difference between saying, I think you should, and clients buy this because they get. It's a difference in how your words are felt and experienced. And particularly today with kids who are not terribly articulate, you may have noticed that, millennials. So that's a couple of themes that I see.
And why do you think is it that? Is it because they've never had to talk on the phone? Is it?
I don't know. I just think we have a general degradation of language in this country. I think that people are just not asked to debate in classes anymore. They're not asked to write as much as we used to write. I think all the shortcuts on the language online takes away from their ability to articulate. And of course, I'm sure you're aware of this. Every other word out of some of millennials' lives these days is like. Like actually. Like this, and like, it's just dreadful. Maybe I'm showing my age, but when I mimic it to them, when I say, for example, like my name is Ann Miller, and I really help people increase their sales and shorten sales, and then they laugh because they realize how awful it sounds, but they don't know it themselves. So,
how about as far as the actual slides or the means in which they use to communicate? That certainly has changed over the last few years. I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. The slides, SLIDES? Yes.
Well, they tend to they don't understand. Let me back up, and it answers your other question as well. They don't understand how people process information. So if you put a lot of numbers and facts and words on a slide and throw it up there, and then read it, or even if you don't read it, but you throw it up there and talk while it's up there, they don't understand that actually confuses people. They don't understand that less is better. And they don't trust themselves sometimes to put up fewer words and just work with images, to trust themselves to know what they want to say. So it's a total lack of understanding of how people process information and what really works. You know the analogy to the Chinese proverb, I tell you and you forget, I show you and you remember, I involve you and you understand.
Yep.
So I always say to kids, if I wanted to teach you, I shouldn't say kids.
Yeah,
adults.
Please don't.
No, it's not kids. It's adults as well.
Yeah.
Because we're brought up with so much information, we think information is enough. But I always say to them, if I were going to teach you tennis, I could tell you that tennis is played on a 78-foot long court and it's 37 feet wide, and you play with 4 or 2 people, and there are rackets and a ball and there's net and there's lines. You have to get the ball inside the court. I said, now do you understand how to play tennis? And of course they say no. And I say, I could show you a video as I explain it, and that would be much better. And they agree. Or I can put you on a court with a racket in your hand, and then you would really get what the game is like. And I always say that the best presenters play at the show and involve level, and the worst presenters play at the tell level. And then they understand that. And then, of course, they need to understand how many different ways you can do show and involve. And then it takes them to a whole other level of understanding of how to be effective in sales or presenting. But then I modeled what I did. I made them see what I was talking about as opposed to just telling them.
Yeah, I mean, I get that, and I like that a lot because, being a podcaster, people are looking for both entertainment and information, but it doesn't necessarily make you better until you do it.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, you use a great analogy with tennis. I use a cooking analogy. Watching cooking shows doesn't make you a chef.
Right.
So how do you engage people when you're with them?
I always think about, what do I know about them?
Yeah.
What's the common ground here where I can make a point? For example, I was coaching a rising star yesterday, someone who is a great technical background, and he's got all the right instincts but has no sense of the structure of a sale or how to sell. And he was asking me, part of his sales process is that they have to ask you literally 35 questions about your home system so that they know what kind of air conditioning or whatever it is that they sell that he should recommend. And so he started asking 35 questions. And of course, by question 6, I had lost it. And I said, let's back up. I said, if I would tell you about presenting, and then I started going through 35 facts of presenting. By the 6th fact, I said to him, how do you feel? He said, I'm waiting for this to end.
Yep.
I said, absolutely. That's what your clients are doing also. So here's a better way to ask those 35 questions, because he had to ask the questions. I said, why don't you say, I have 3 chunks of questions, 3 blocks of questions to ask you. The first block is to get a little context. The second block is to understand how your system is working now. And the third block will help us figure out what the right system is to install. And he did that. And of course, he felt more comfortable because it was less of an interrogation.
Yep.
And as a prospect or a buyer or a prospect would feel much better with that. So I always try to make them experience the error of their ways, and then they get it. And it doesn't matter whether they're CEOs or they're rising stars. You always have to think through the lens of the person you're talking to, and that works much better.
So what I heard was, break it down, put and almost like reverse the situation so that they can sense what the other person is feeling.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. And really arguing or presenting by analogy, and I'm very big on metaphors and analogies to help people understand whatever point you're trying to make.
Building off of what they already understand.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That was always super powerful for me when I was selling a new technology. I always mapped it back to something that everybody understood.
Right. And technology people, because I do work with tech people, financial technology folks, they don't get it. It's not in their, they don't think about that automatically. I mean, that's not their currency. That's not why they were hired. But it's very easy for them to understand that because, they're people also. So once you make the point and once you help them experience the truth of what you're saying, as you say, mapping it back to something they can put their arms around, then it's much easier for them to be effective as communicators.
And that's it, because what people do by default is the buzzword, parade. And nobody knows what that means,
right?
Or how it's different than what they might have in their head.
Right. And then when people are confused, they just add more words to the parade. I love that word, that image, parade, word parade. Do you mind if I steal it?
How's that for an analogy? If it works, let me know.
Right.
But yeah, because it's just natural for people to talk in their language instead of the customer's language.
Right. And the customer's experience, the customer's world. I don't mean experience with your product, but I just mean the life experience of the other person.
Yeah. Because I was selling this super complicated security device at one time, and we called it a firewall, but if I used that word, they thought of like a $5,000 piece of equipment, and this thing was $50,000.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to say, like, you go to the airport, and there's multiple levels of security. You have to get your boarding pass, so you have to put a credit card in at the kiosk or give an ID, and then that's one credential. And then you have to go show that credential or the boarding pass with your ID to get in the line. Once you're in the line, depending on the level of interrogation you go through, you have to take your shoes, your belt off, your computer, separate all these things apart, go through a metal detector, an X-ray machine. And everyone got that because everyone has done that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I said, that's what we do differently. We are the X-ray machine and the metal detector versus just the person checking the ID in your boarding pass.
Right. And then they have that aha moment.
Yes.
They got it.
Yes.
Yeah. It's brilliant. And that's, I think, in an age of information overload and where products and services are pretty similar, and so they begin to blur in the mind of the buyer, that the one way you can set yourself apart is by giving these people deeper aha moments with metaphors, analogies. They get it. And not only do they get it, if they have to explain it to somebody in their own companies, another decision maker that you're not getting to, it gives them the language, the tool to explain the value that you're bringing to the party.
Yeah. And when I showed up at this job, the CEO was this young Russian guy out of MIT, and he took me aside. He goes, Brian, if you don't show every single one of these 75 slides, you will not win the deal. Mm-hmm. And I went, Eugene, if I show them these 75 slides, I will never win a deal.
Right. I will put them to sleep.
And it'll take me 3 months to learn what all these things mean on all these slides.
Right. Couldn't agree with you more.
And he goes, well, it works for me. And I go, yeah, maybe you can bond with the super security PhDs and stuff, but I won't be able to. And I don't talk to them. And I'll bring you in when I do talk to them.
Right.
I'm going to be talking to other people.
That reminds me of a story. Years ago, I was training, I forget his name, but the fellow who created the Shoals option box, and he was at Goldman Sachs, and he was going to be giving a talk to an internal group at Goldman. And I was coaching him, and I'm listening to him go into all these details, and I stopped him. I said, you really have to, my suggestion is that you throw in a few examples, make it more concrete for people. He said, I don't have to do that. I said, well, they need to understand. He goes, I understand it. I said, but they need to understand it.
Yeah, that's the problem.
And so he really was fighting me on it. And the beauty of being a presentation coach is that or sales coach, is that you use video. So I videotaped him presenting a piece of his talk the way he wanted to, and then the same talk, giving an example or an analogy, and then I played them back. And he was quiet, and then he said, you're right.
Yeah.
So it's not that I needed to be right. I needed to have him see the value of helping other people see at their level what he was talking about.
Now, what's your feeling about trying to elicit an emotion or an anchor with people, either through, that analogy or what their life would be like, before and after getting or experimenting with the product?
Well, I think the emotion, comes from talking about the value of what they hope to get. I was working with a company where it's a resume company, and they would tell you everything that, the different packages and what they do and how they get people to write their resumes, etc., and totally uninvolving for me, the applicant. And I asked them to say, why don't you ask them things like how long it's been that you've been looking for a job? What will it mean to you when you get a job? So that they can articulate, well, I'll be able to pay off my college loan, or I'll be able to send my kid to college, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
That these people have to see the value of whatever it is you're selling or promoting. And so I think you need to do that pretty early on, and then you can get into details.
Yeah.
But that needs to come out pretty early on.
But I sensed, you say value, but I felt something there that because that's a great feeling to pay off a loan, right? A burden.
Yeah.
And if you can elicit that pain, pleasure elements of whatever it is that you do for people.
Yeah. I think the real problem, and I'm just seeing this recently with some people I've been working with, is people don't understand that it's the value of what you're selling that's important, not the actual item.
Right. Yes.
It's the old, why do people buy nails? Not for the nails, but for the holes they make. And it always strikes me as, why don't people understand that? And it even comes down to dealing with cost objections, price objections. I was working with a really successful videographer, and he was very uncomfortable asking about, offering pricing, costing. And I said, why do people use you? If it's a wedding, if it's a real estate thing. He says, well, they want to have this wonderful time and all that. I said, well, that's what you're selling. You're not selling that you do videos. And once he was able to see that and what it's worth to people, he had a much easier time quoting a price.
And what value was he really trying to elicit them sensing? Was it that years from now they'd have this treasure that they could hold?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's a very normal thing to get focused on our own product and its features and benefits,
Yes.
or its features, and get too lost into that.
I think it's the number one thing that gets in everybody's way about communicating, is that we see the world through our eyes and have a hard time. It's this reptilian brain that, focuses us on survival.
Yeah, and let me tell you a very quick story. It's a great story. It happened years ago, but I still use it. I was teaching a group of advertising sales reps, a selling course, and I was getting to this point about vision drives action. But what I said to them was, I want you to turn to each other and tell each other what you do every day. And so they buzzed for a little bit. And then afterwards I said, what did you hear? Took volunteers. Or I said, how many of you said you did something like, I sell advertising? I go out and I call on big accounts. And that's what most people said. And I said, did anybody hear anything different? And one person raised his hand and said, yeah, I heard this guy say, I'm out there transforming the world. And we all just stopped for a minute. I mean, advertising is not the cure for cancer, right? And I said to him, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, and he worked for Inc. magazine at the time. And he just felt when he was out there, he was offering such value that his readership would really help these companies sell product, help them grow, and transform the economy.
And that's what changes people. I think that's like the Southwest Airlines story, the people connecting with their customers, and not just seeing it as the functional, this is what I do to make money.
Right, right. I also always say to people, what's on the table between you and your client? If you see money on the table, your commission, your contract, you're going to have a very different interchange with these people than if what's on the table is the client's problem.
Yes.
And if you see yourself sitting on the same side of the table to solve the problem. It's not that you are not interested in your commission, but your commission or your salary is the way you keep score. It should not be the driving dynamic when you are in front of the client or on the phone with the client. Changes everything.
It does. And I mean, there is a big drive today that's being driven by kind of the subscription economy. That the good part of it is that the value of the customer is looked at from a lifetime value instead of a transactional, immediate value. Mm-hmm. But companies are having a hard time with it.
Well, I don't know. I'm sure you get a lot of phone calls. I get a lot of inside sales phone calls.
Yeah.
And aside from the fact that they're really annoying when they come on as your great friends. Hi, Ann. How are you today? Who the heck are you? Or I was fine until you called. And they're just pushing their product.
Yeah.
They have no sense of how to establish some kind of credibility, some kind of human rapport. It's amazing to me. It's amazing to me. There are very few sales managers, I think, who've taught their people the right way to do that.
So what does work on you if somebody wanted to, present an idea to you that they think you could gain value from? That, they've done their research on you, your business. What approach would work? Is it social? Is it phone? Is it email?
I think they should do a little homework on me for sure. There's so much information online, as you've said in other podcasts, as we all know. And I think they have to have a reason why they're calling that relates to me.
Yes.
Other than, hey, we have this new deal.
Got a great end of month price. Yeah.
Or, hey, we have this new system. Or we can double your web traffic. I mean, that's just so off-putting. And the irony is, I think it would be off-putting to them as well.
Of course
if someone
it would.
approached them that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, let me go back to your first question about what's the best way. I always think referral is good.
Yeah.
Either referral or reference. So if they're calling about doubling web traffic, let's say, at least go to my site.
Yes.
And say, gee, I notice you're in this business and you have this caliber of clients. So it shows me that you've done some homework. So I think they have, and a referral, of course, is always the best way to get new business.
And how about if they just know people that you work with or people that you respect and are connected with?
Oh, absolutely. It's similar. Yes. It would be something I recognize.
Yeah. And what channels do you pay the most attention to when you're looking for something?
Oh, I'll Google something.
Yeah.
I'll go to LinkedIn. Pretty much those two.
Yeah. But you still pick up your phone, it sounds like.
I think I email more than I do, and then I follow up with a phone call.
Yeah.
Or I ask for a convenient time to talk. I don't do any cold calling for my business.
No.
It's always, there's a reason for it, or there's a reference, or there's a referral.
Great. Hey, this has been a great conversation. Where do people go to get your book, connect with you, and learn more about your company?
Okay. So the book is The Tall Lady with the Iceberg, The Power of Metaphors to Sell, Persuade, and Explain Anything to Anyone. The Tall Lady with the Iceberg. They can get it on Amazon.
Metaphors are really a great way to communicate value and understanding. And you hear it a lot in sales pitches as far as investments, like we're the Uber of this or the Netflix of that. But what you have to do is really start with something that they know already and build off of it, instead of trying to use a bunch of buzzwords that confuse somebody. But you also don't want to position yourselves as like your competitor, because then it makes it hard to distinguish how you're different than your competitor. And it takes a little bit of thought, and a lot of people get stuck with it because it's kind of one of those creative things that we don't do very often. So I recommend, sitting down with other reps, your manager, and say, well, how would you explain to this somebody outside the industry? And somebody has figured it out. It might be the CEO, it might be the marketing people, maybe not the marketing people, but somebody has thought about it. Have you thought about a metaphor for what we do? What's it like in the non-our world? And, I use the radio show on your smartphone for people that don't understand podcasting. But they kind of get as like, imagine on-demand radio, like you have on-demand TV right now. You play it whenever you have time. It's not just if you're not available at the time it's available, you miss it, or it's not like you have to record it. It's just there. It's downloadable. And people are starting to get that. And I'm still surprised how many people have not heard of podcasting yet, which still makes my job a little interesting. But I really appreciate everybody who's helping out the podcast, spreading the word, liking my stuff on LinkedIn, connecting up with me on LinkedIn. I do have a company page for all the podcasts now, and I will be posting video content and blog posts to them, so make sure you go and follow them on LinkedIn. Just search for the podcast name, Brutal Truth, B2B, Sales Questions, and Career Advice, so you get kept up to date. I also post out the Libsyn file to there if you want to listen online, meaning not on your smartphone. Also, I want to make sure that you're checking out the B2B Revenue .com website. I've got a free ebook there on how companies make purchase decisions. You can check out the training courses. The prices are going up in September. So if the courses are interesting, make sure you order them now. Some people have concerns about office hours not being available at that time. I get that, but I do answer all the questions. So it's not just if you show up for office hours that your question gets answered. All questions get answered. Some may not fit into the office hours, and what I do is I make a separate video for that. So if you haven't heard about the courses, basically it's a year-long access, and you can pay all at once or throughout the year. You have access to it for a year. There's video content in there, as well as all the office hours are recorded and put into the course. And you can ask questions, give examples of what you're doing now, all anonymously. Nobody knows who you are, what you sell, or what company you work for, your customer names, and I answer them. So it has this kind of network effect of the more people in the course, the more valuable the course becomes to the other students, the other people learning from it. And it's kind of a year-long commitment that you make to yourself to becoming better at sales. It's not like the type of thing where I don't know how to sell. Even if you are an A player already, wouldn't it be great to have your game pulled apart? Look at your deals and look at your year and ask any questions, get any feedback, really kind of map out your process and have other people kind of give you feedback of what they think when your deals are going to get stuck and how you can prevent all the things from going wrong, as well as just, career advice about, what are the best companies, what are your concerns about certain managers? What things should you be looking for? All of that stuff where you have somebody dedicated to helping you throughout a year. So I really appreciate you listening today. Make sure you check out the Sales Questions podcast. That's now up to 5 days a week. I'm getting so many questions. Connect up with me on LinkedIn. That's a great way to connect with me. Also at b2brevenue.com. Make sure you're checking out all the partners. Pipedrive's got a coupon code of Brutal Truth. You get a free month of that as well with nudge.ai. Same coupon code, Brutal Truth. I hope you're checking out Gong's blog. They're doing some great work. Going to be doing a lot more work with Gong in the next 3 months, really showing how a great sales call works scientifically, kind of, and mark down the things that are critical mistakes, the talk to listen time. But there's also those, running over people like I do in my interviews or, thinking about what you're going to say next with instead of listening and instead of pulling things out of people or using non-words like, or really like we did in this interview or actually, or, all of that stuff. What's great about Gong is it records it for you, and you can basically it's a non-word, is then look at it and analyze it. And what you'll find is it's really interesting. I mean, the poor man's version of it is you can record your calls, and then there's a bunch of text, voice-to-text things on the internet, and then put it into Grammarly. Like I do with some of the interviews, I'll put it into Grammarly and it'll show you all the mistakes you're making, the grammar mistakes, the English mistakes, the use of non-words. And it gives you some insight, but Gong will do that for you and be able to give you a much better insight into how good that conversation is going. So really check it out, gong.io. They've got probably the best content as far as fresh new sales content that's based off of something scientific versus anecdotal. My stuff's mostly anecdotal, but time. You can't really replace time and hard-learned lessons and listening to other people and working with, because I've been working with hundreds of salespeople for the last 8 or 9 years. I will do an episode on what I've learned during the 9 years of the podcast. It's been so much fun. You learn so much about people, and I'd like to share those stories with you. It'll be kind of a comical episode. I really don't want to out anybody, but I'm dying to. So I appreciate you listening. We'll see you next time.